Hi again, Risa here, back with another episode of Ask Risa. This is my weekly video series where I give you tips and advice if you are trying to plan your own wedding. And if you are not interested in planning your own wedding, give me a call. I am a Sacramento area wedding planner, and I love working with clients to ease their wedding stress and take the burden of planning off of them. It is what I do. So this week I am talking about wedding transportation and different options. I have briefly mentioned wedding transportation in some of my earlier videos, but this week I want to focus exclusively on transportation. So when it comes to transportation, there's basically three groups of people that you need to think about. Yourselves as the couple getting married, your wedding party members, your bridesmaids and groomsmen, and your wedding guests. So starting with the couple getting married, you and your fiancé, the first thing you need to realize is that the two of you are not going to arrive at your wedding venue together because you will not see each other prior to the wedding or prior to the first look if you're having one. So you're leaving together, but you're not arriving together. So you have to think through the logistics of how that's happening. Maybe if the groom is driving to the reception venue, either by himself or with some of his groomsmen, you can, then you have a car there, but do you really want to be driving yourselves home after your wedding? Probably not, especially if you plan to drink at your wedding. You don't want to have a drinking and driving situation. If you don't drink, whether for personal or religious reasons, then fine. Maybe you do want to drive yourself home from your wedding. It's certainly the most convenient and least expensive option. Just make sure you have a car there to drive yourselves home in. But if you don't want to drive yourself, then you can rely on Lyft and Uber if you live in a city or your wedding is not taking place way out in the countryside. Their reliability is less the further from civilization you get. But they're a great option to have. You can schedule them in advance if you know exactly what time you want them to pick you up, or you can just, call them on the app like you normally do when you use Uber and Lyft. So technology has come a long way in the past few years in that regard. You also could arrange for a limousine or another luxury car service to transport you. There are services here in Sacramento. There's a company I've worked with called Sacktown Vintage. They rent luxury Bentleys and Rolls Royces, so you can have them drive you. It's not just you're renting the car, you're renting a driver as well. So let's say the bride wants to ride in the luxury car getting to the ceremony location, if you're getting married in a church. And then the car can wait, because the ceremony is only going to be half hour at the most, probably. The car can wait, and then the car can drive both the bride and groom together over to the reception location. I had some couples do this once. And then the car is released because you don't want to pay to have a car sitting outside your reception for 5 hours or however long it lasts. So then you need alternate arrangements to get home or wherever you're going after the reception is over. Same thing with a limo. You can have a limo either bring you to the ceremony and then take you from the ceremony to the reception if they're in different places, or if they're in the same place, maybe it makes sense to just have them come get you at the end of the night. I have clients later this year who are doing a grand exit with sparklers, and so they're going to have the Rolls Royce, the vintage Rolls Royce, waiting outside. They're going to exit to the sparklers and get into the car and drive away. For them, it makes sense because they're actually driving somewhere far away, so the minimum rental requirement for the car makes sense because you have to rent it for at least 2 hours. A lot of these transportation options do have minimums. So it's just something to think through, like what you want and where you're going. With your wedding party, again, limousines can be useful unless you have a really large wedding party. If you have 16 people in your wedding, you're not all going to fit in one limo. So you either need multiple limos or you can do something like a shuttle bus. Group transportation for your wedding party, also useful if you have wedding party members who are not great at arriving on time to places. So if they have someone else doing the driving, then they might be more likely to actually get there on time. Something to think about. With shuttles, usually we can arrange two different times for them. There'll be an initial pickup and drop off to get people to the reception or the ceremony or the venue, and then the shuttle goes away for several hours, and then the shuttle comes back at the end of the night to pick people up, to take them where they need to go. With your wedding party, having group transportation at the end of the night only makes sense if they're all going to the same place, if they're all going to the same hotel, or if they're all going to an after party. But then, of course, after the after party, you have the same conundrum of how do they get where they're going from the after party. But again, Uber and Lyft can be useful if you're in a place where they actually operate and have service. And then there's guest transportation. So if a lot of your guests are coming from out of town, they'll be staying in hotels. It's a really nice touch to have some sort of group transportation arranged for them. Usually shuttles, but you can do fun things like school buses or trolleys, streetcars, that type of thing. And your wedding planner, if you have one, can help you research this and make suggestions for you and help you actually make the reservations and figure out the timing. If you have multiple hotels, you just have to work it out so that the shuttle can get to each of the hotels in line and then get the guest to the venue. And it's possible, if you have enough time and if the venue's close enough, to even make 2 trips. You can do an earlier trip and then a later trip. That's more common at the end of the night, actually, for people who might want to leave earlier, older people and people who just don't, aren't going to stay and party until 11 o'clock or midnight. Sometimes you have an earlier shuttle trip back to the hotel and then a later trip at the end of the wedding when everything is definitely over. If you're not doing group transportation, it's helpful to at least let your guests know what the parking situation is. Is there valet parking? Is it self-parking? Is it a parking garage, a parking lot, street parking? If there's valet parking, find out from your venue ahead of time whether the valets are allowed to accept tips, and maybe consider if you want to do a bulk tip for the valets. I actually talked about tipping in general a couple weeks ago in an episode, or whether your guests are going to be tipping the valets as they drop off their cars or pick them up. So just communicate with your guests what the options are. And a great way to do that is on your wedding website, which I talked about last week. So you can find that episode in my playlist here. All the past episodes are pretty handy. Or if you're doing welcome bags in the hotel, you can put a little slip of paper in there that has information about the wedding weekend, including parking information. And one last thing to keep in mind is that transportation is pretty expensive. You need to budget at least about $1,000, regardless of whether you're doing a shuttle or a limo or a luxury car. The more stuff you add, obviously the more expensive it gets. If you have multiple shuttles, if you have them making multiple trips, if they're waiting around for any length of time, the price goes up. So if you want to do transportation, that's great. Totally doable. Just be aware of it when you're making your budget so you can be sure to put a line item in for that. So those are my tips on transportation. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them down below. And if you like this video, give it a thumbs up because that helps the algorithm find it and show it to other people who might be having the same questions. And I will be back next week with another episode. Thanks. Bye for now.